Wonderful. Hello, everyone. I'm Alina Mitchell, the Associate Director of Academic Innovation and Technology at the Jacobs Institute for Innovation and Education at the University of San Diego. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our Ed Innovation Expert webinar with George Couros. He's the instructor of the 6-week course, Innovator's Mindset, which is part of the Professional Learning Certificate in Ed Innovation. We're happy to have you with us today, George.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Before George begins his presentation, I'd like to take a moment to share some background information about the certificate program. Within our research here at the Jacobs Institute, we've identified 3 key areas of Ed Innovation, which includes learning experience design or LX design and emerging technology, Ed Innovation leadership, and edupreneurship. This program is designed for professionals interested in the emerging domain of Ed Innovation and the career opportunities within the Ed Innovation space. So at the end of the webinar, I'll follow up by emailing you a recorded copy of today's session and more details about the program. But without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to George so he can present about his course.
Hey, and thanks everyone for joining, and thanks for having me, Alina, too. And I know Lisa, appreciate you kind of inviting me to teach this course this year, and I'm really excited about it. I also see Natalie, my friend from Calgary. We got some Canadians in the space too, which is awesome. So Natalie, I'm sure just like me, we'd rather be able to take it in San Diego, but we're not allowed over the border right now. So I guess this is the best, second best choice here. So I'm going to share some ideas with you, and then just kind of a little bit about the course, a little bit about who I am, and then I'm going to take some questions and answers, and you could talk about the content. We could talk about like kind of the course, but also understanding that the plan for it too is because it's not it's a limited group. Even though I have some ideas and things that I want to share, I'm a learner in the process as well. And I want to really adapt and identify, in a space where we can make it to exactly what people need in the space, and really personalizing it for everyone that's there. So for example, if you're an administrator, how does the stuff that I'm talking about apply to you, and how do you use it in a really practical way in your work right now? And if you're like a kindergarten teacher, a counselor, or whatever, these ideas apply. And I think that's something that's really important, is that the idea of the innovator's mindset is something that a lot of people think, hey, this would be great to develop in our students, but really kind of the best way to actually develop it is to model it ourselves. And so I'm going to kind of share some of those ideas, share kind of a little bit about who I am, and the work that I do. And so you are more than welcome to connect with me on Instagram or Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. And I think this is one of the things that we will be doing in the course, is having the opportunity to actually share and learn from each other, not only in these spaces during this time, but after this time as well. Natalie and I actually have a podcast coming up together soon. I'm looking forward to joining her. So a lot of people that I've connected with these spaces are actually people that I've connected with before, will connect with after. And I think this is something that's really powerful to me. Being an educator, when I first started teaching in 1999, there's no way you should, if you just started teaching this year, that you shouldn't be better than what I was, because you have access to so many amazing people. Like you have access to so many great ideas in a way that I actually didn't. And when we talk about technology and we talk about how we utilize things, I think the power is not just in all the access to information that we have, but more importantly, the access we have to one another. And for those of you who don't know anything about me, my name is George Couros. I'm the author of The Innovator's Mindset and Innovate Inside the Box. And I know that I'm really blessed to be able to work with a group full of educators, because honestly, I did not want to be a teacher. I went to university because my parents forced me to go. And then I was 20 years old, got a degree that was useless to me at the time. And then I saw a movie and it changed my life. It was Billy Madison. I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. So I'm actually a trained kindergarten teacher because of that movie, but kindergarten is the only grade I never taught. I taught grade 1 to 12. I was a vice principal, I was a principal. I worked in central office for 8 years. So I had a lot of different opportunities to do many different experiences. And really one thing for me, as I said earlier, is the idea that everything I talk about are things that I do. I don't ask people to try things that, will challenge them unless I'm willing to do them myself. And so that's a really important aspect, and you'll kind of see in this process. And I think that's really important to me. And that's kind of my background as an educator, but also I'm a dad. And these are my beautiful daughters, Georgia and Kalia. And I'll tell you, I know that the pandemic has been really tough, but I try to find gratitude. And honestly, one of the things I'm extremely grateful for, I've been home during this time. Georgia was born on June 5th. And just the most adorable little baby. It's just been fun being home. Usually at this time of the year, I'm traveling and speaking all over the world. And I'm just really kind of appreciating all these moments and actually spending time with Kalia. And I travel probably 250 days a year. I'm away from home. And it's interesting because Kalia actually said she can't even remember when I was gone now. And that to me is something that, is really special. And you see her and I making these little TikToks together. And what you might see is the technology, you might see the video, but what you don't see is all the planning, the relationships that we built, talking about how we make these things together. And so I really look at the work that I do in education. I look at how do I help to ensure that my kids have a better opportunity, and the same hopes that I have for my two daughters is what I have for every kid. And I want to talk about those hopes really quickly. And so the first one, when we talk about the hopes I have for my own kids, and as I said, for every kid that enters, into our schools, is that they'll feel welcome and valued in school, in the classrooms. And this to me is really something that's really important in the work that we do. And when kids walk in, as you notice when you enter the space, for many of you that were here, at the beginning of the session, you had that little meme check-in, right? Really kind of starting the focus with, checking in to make sure, see how you're doing today, things like that. And you could do this in any space. It doesn't, whether it's virtual, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's hybrid. I think it's really important to, understand, what does it look like when our kids walk into our classrooms? What do they see represented on the walls? What do they see in the literature? Is the school more about the adults, or is it more about the kids? Do we talk about collaboration, but then just actually have access to individual awards when people walk in? And this is really important to me. And I remember when I first became a principal, I walked into my new building and I was really excited. And I noticed on my right was a glass office, and that was actually going to be my space that I was going to be in as a principal. And you could see every person walking into the school is absolutely beautiful. And to the left, when I walked in, was a gymnasium, and above the gymnasium doors was a picture of every single principal who had ever served in that school ever. And I actually watched kids walk in, and I never saw a kid look up at those pictures and go, that was the principal in 1972. Amazing. Nobody cared at all. And so I actually talked to I felt really comfortable. And I remember talking to my secretary about 2 months later. I just never brought it up, but it kind of bothered me every day. That's what we saw. And my secretary said to me, hey, when are you gonna get your portrait for the wall? I'm like, I'm not going up on that wall. And she's like, well, you have to. You're the principal. I'm like, well, I'm the principal. I actually don't have to, because I'm the principal. I can kind of do what I want. That's the beauty of my job. And so I actually talked to my staff and I said, hey, I do not feel comfortable with those pictures. I think that we say we're all about kids, but the first thing you see when you walk in are the adults. And my staff, surprisingly, none of them were the principal, obviously, said, oh, no, you cannot take down those pictures. That is tradition. And one of my favorite quotes ever is, tradition is peer pressure from dead people. And I actually don't think all tradition is bad. And that's not my quote, by the way. But thinking about it from this context is, do we do things in school because we've always done them, or because they're beneficial? And I think that some tradition is really, really good. So for example, I'm telling a lot of stories already, and storytelling is one of the most, traditional practices in education. And it's probably one of the most valuable, and it's probably the oldest. And so some things that we do are traditional. And I think, when we talk about innovation, it seems like it's anti-tradition, and it's not. It's pro finding what works for kids. And sometimes the most traditional practices work for our kids. And I talked my staff into getting those pictures off the wall. and then replace them with pictures of current kids in the building. And we'd update them every 2 months. And the difference in that school, when you watch kids walk in, they would look up and go, oh, I am on the wall. They'd see themselves and how important that was. And so do our actions align with what we say we're trying to do in our classrooms? And so the next thing that we talk about, and I think this is really important for me in this course as well, is that we start with strengths and we find the passions of, the people we serve. This will surprise many of you here today. But when I was a kid, I was punished for talking all the time. I know that's very shocking to many of you, but that is actually one of my strengths. And the classrooms where I flourished understood that. And it wasn't that I was disruptive and bothering the people. They found a way to harness that and tap into it. They saw it as something beneficial. And sometimes when we look at education, I think that we look at what kids can do, and if they don't fit into the academic constraints, we kind of toss away those abilities, as opposed to saying like, hey, this kid has some really incredible abilities. How do we tie this into the curriculum? And I'm not saying that we ignore weaknesses of, our adults, of our kids in our schools, but it's really the importance of starting with strengths, starting with what we are really good at, and making people not only be valued, but more importantly, feel valued, because being valued and feeling valued are two different things. And then the last one is that learners will feel that their contributions are necessary to the success of the class and the school as a whole. This to me is important as someone teaching this course, and also someone, as an educator, is really powerful. If you think about the most effective teaching, in the end of the 2019-2020 school year, how did we get kids into those, remote spaces, and acknowledging many kids had to like jump through hoops and go and, jump through barriers to get to those spaces. If you create a space where the people in in those classes feel that what they're adding is so necessary to the success of others, they are more likely to show up, as opposed to they are just passive participants. And so these are things that I think are important for all learners. And when I say learners, I'm not talking just students, I'm talking about the adults as well. And how do we create this? And Sine Bell, she's a very good friend of mine. She's the principal in the Houston area. She says students should have rich, relevant, and authentic experiences at school across the board. In one sentence from her book, she so succinctly shares what I'm trying to do in my work. And the word that really sticks out to me here is authentic. When we talk about authentic, is this authentic to the teacher or to the learner? And I'll give you an example of this. When most of you in this space today probably read The Great Gatsby in high school, or at least know somebody who did. And my question is always, I'm not saying The Great Gatsby isn't a great book. To be honest with you, I took it in school, but I never read it. I couldn't give you an accurate assessment. I'm sure it's a great book, but did we read The Great Gatsby because it was in the curriculum, or did we read it because there was 100 copies that we already owned and the teacher knew the book inside out? And for me, I actually didn't really like reading fiction as a kid. And to be honest with you, I still don't like reading fiction, but I love reading. Could I have read the book that Jordan Rules covered the curriculum? And do I see that connection? I know that it's impossible to personalize every single thing for every single learner, but the more opportunities that we have in education to do that, the more powerful the learning will be. We talk about innovation all the time, but understanding that people aren't innovative in things they despise, right? It's where we give them the opportunity to excel is where the innovation really happens. And so I'm going to talk a lot about these things, but really honoring how complicated teaching and learning is right now. And for me, with all these complications, the best advice I can give people is really focus on connection. Focus on that connection first. And what happens when COVID struck and, people are having hard times getting, students to show up to classes, getting assignments. People were asking me like, how do you get kids homework, to get that done? How do you get them to do these assignments? I'm like, look, you need to worry about the kid, and the stuff will take care of itself. But if you focus too much on the stuff, we're going to lose our kids through this process. And so that connection is really the core of the work that we do. And I know how complicated this was because, feeling super overwhelmed. I even saw in some of your responses as you enter the space, how tiring the day is. You probably feel a lot like this, which I know I feel a lot like this kid some days. Sometimes I just want to reply to emails with okay in this picture. That totally resonates with me. And this video, it's so beautifully in song, shares how the last few months have felt for many of us.
Hey, so as some of you guys might know, I'm a music teacher, and I found that one of the best ways that I can process the whole transition to online learning and teaching is to write a song. So I wrote a song. I'd like to share that with you guys now. Here we go.
So maybe this is just me, maybe this is just personal, but I'm sure a lot of you felt like that over the few months. And so how do we create really incredible experiences in our learning, no matter the situation that we're in? And probably even today, some of you are answering here. I know some of you specifically are doing face-to-face learning right now, because I know some of you and some of you are doing totally virtual. So how do we create this? And so when we talk about this idea of the innovator's mindset, which obviously is the title of the course, which is the title of the book that it's based on, why does this really matter to the work that we do? And I think people that have kind of, have and emulate this innovator's mindset have been able to deal with the last few months in a really powerful way. And I'll kind of give you an idea of like what this is even based on in the first place. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with Carol Dweck's work. She talks about fixed and growth mindset. And even when I'm looking at people that are, registering and, providing comments, we talk about growth mindset all the time. And here's what I'll tell you. It is so crucial to the work that we do, but it's also not enough. And I think that we talk about this as a way that we can absorb new information and think about how we can grow in certain areas. But do we actually look at how we create new ideas, how we create solutions to things that we like? How do we look at creating the future that we want for our kids? And so this is why I developed the idea of the innovator's mindset, trying to go a step further in this and simply define it's the belief that abilities, intelligence, and talents are developed so they lead to the creation of new and better ideas. So I'll give you a simple example. I do not want my kids simply to be good at math. I want my kids to be able to do something with the math they have learned, which means they will be probably phenomenal at math. And so if you take these three mindsets in the context of playing the piano, fixed mindset, I will never be able to learn to play. Growth mindset, with hard work, time, effort, I can learn. Innovator's mindset, I will not only learn to play, I will compose, I will create music. And so where's that artistry in the learning that we have? Where is that artistry in what we do with our curriculum? The curriculum often tells you what you have to teach, but not how. How is what separates people. And I think, how do you emulate this? I think for me, when we talk about in this course, how do we actually create these spaces where we develop this in the people we serve, but also how do we, kind of emulate this ourselves? And Alina, in the description of like what we're trying to do today is like really who should take this course. And honestly, it's anybody that wants to grow and wants to create something from what they grow. And I think that to me is really essential. So for example, I'm looking at, I'm a grade 2 teacher, and I'm looking at all of these things that are being thrown my way right now. So am I just going to learn them, or am I going to create something with the knowledge that I share? And this is not just about obtaining new knowledge. It's about going in depth with our learning and really thinking about innovation is not about just doing new stuff all the time, but actually doing better. And when I talk about the definition of innovation, I simply put it to, it's doing new and better things. But a lot of schools are just constantly focused on the new thing, but we haven't got really good at the old thing. And so how do we actually look at innovation as, kind of going in depth? And then you take the administrator who, maybe doesn't have staff that's really excited for, the school year. How do we create something for them that they are really a part of creating that is something better? So really the context of this course, I think a lot of times we look at it to, hey, who does this apply to? Well, it depends on how you create what you create for yourself. And I'll give you an example of this. I do professional learning with groups all over the world, and I'll get little comments, in the surveys after. What about math? Like, what about music? You didn't give any examples for music. And so here's my response to this all the time. You are the expert in teaching music. That's what you've been trained in. That's what you've been teaching for years. What I need you to do is to take the ideas I'm sharing and make them applicable to your own context. So when I go to any professional learning, it's always relevant to me because I will always find something in that professional learning and actually take it and create something within my own context of what I'm trying to figure out. But too often what we want from these professional learning opportunities is we want someone just to give us carbon copy ideas that we can, implement Monday. When we hear about how good a session is, we say, oh, I got a bunch of ideas I can do Monday. But really, innovation is not about what we can do Monday. It's what we can do moving forward to get better. And a lot of times that takes effort and that takes consistency through that process. So really in this course, it's really emulating that idea of like, what are you going to create? How are you going to take it to your own context? And these characteristics are going to be a huge part of what we're developing and what we're creating, through this process. And these are the characteristics that I talk about really being crucial to the innovator's mindset and why they're so important. And so how do you actually take your curriculum, how do you take your learning and make this, develop empathy in our students, develop our students not as problem solvers, but problem finders, that they actually find problems that are meaningful to them and then create solutions. A lot of times kids are asked in schools to solve problems they don't even care about. And so I'm not going to go through each one of these, but understanding that they all connect to one another. These are not isolated things. So for example, if I want to be an effective problem finder and solver, I'm going to have to be reflective through that process. Did what I create actually, was it beneficial to others? And how do I look back to move forward? And so resiliency is obviously going to be connected. So these are things we're going to be talking about through this process. And just really kind of a quick point of what does the objectives of our course look like? What are they? And understand this, it's not limited to this. And so understanding, for example, what is innovation in education and why is it crucial? You probably hear the term innovation education all the time, but a lot of people just say it because it's like a buzzword. And in education, words become buzzwords when we say them without really having meaning behind them. We just say them because we hear them all the time. You even see that with like social emotional learning. There's pushback to it because people just talk about it, but what does it really mean and why is it beneficial? And so that's what we're going to be talking about with innovation, why it is so crucial to the work we do every day. The next one is create examples of innovative ideas, practices, and solutions in your work through different mediums. So this goes back to the idea of the context of the work that you're doing. The assignments that we're going to be going through this time is going to be like, hey, I want you to create this very specific thing that might not have anything that you do in your work. So for example, an assignment could be something along the lines of, hey, how do you develop reflection in your own context of what you are learning? And actually giving you an opportunity to kind of like double dip, for lack of a better term, to actually do something in your work and use it as part of the course, as opposed to seeing the course as something separate from your current work right now, and giving people the opportunity to share in different mediums. Some people, like when they look at these courses, they think they're gonna have to do a bunch of essays, and it's going to have to be like AP format. I don't even know what that means. I don't know what the prepositional, I couldn't even tell you if a sentence ends with a prepositional phrase. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking at what you create through this, but also giving people opportunities to share in different mediums. And that kind of leads to the next course objective, is really kind of developing like a really robust digital portfolio of learning through this process. And I think why that's important is we want the course to be something beneficial, not only to your teaching and learning, but to your career goals. Like, is this something that you're looking at as a stepping stone to, for example, going into administration or going into like instructional or learning coach position? And so how does this actually help with the next phase of your career? And how does it actually help get your voice out to the world? When we look at these ideas, there is totally the option, and it's actually encouraged, that you're not just sharing your learning with me, but you're sharing your learning with the world. And that leads to the last one, is building a personal learning network for future learning opportunities beyond the course. I can tell you right away, I am so much better because I've learned to connect with people like Natalie and Alina and Lisa that are in this course in this session right now. And how do we ensure that we take this as a stepping stone to something greater? And just a little example of what you will create through this process, and really kind of looking at like a digital portfolio. And this is part of how we're going to create some of our content. And many of you probably have thought about doing digital portfolios for your students. And I'll tell you, a lot of people do them because they get excited about a tech. They'll say, hey, I'm looking, we're using Seesaw. But is that really a portfolio or is it a digital dump? Is it just a place where we put, a bunch of links to things? Or is this something that will actually open up doors for us? Is this something that will actually help us grow in our learning? And so years ago when I was a principal, we looked at doing digital portfolios year after year after year, but we didn't do them because we didn't know what we were doing and we never did them effectively. How can you effectively teach something if you haven't learned it? And that's one of the core principles of the work that I do, is that how do you become, if you want to be a master educator, you have to be a master learner. And so about 10 years ago, I actually started my own digital portfolio. And I'll tell you, it has pushed my learning, but it's opened up doors for me, as honestly it can for our students, but we have to be thoughtful of our implementation. And here's a beautiful example. This is a young lady named Beverly Pham. This is her at 17 years old. She's a high school junior in an English class, and her teacher asked her to create an About.me page. It's like an internet cover letter. And so they said to the students, hey, look, I want you to tell us who you are, tell us what you're interested in learning, but you need to list all of your social networks as well. And I want you to think about, kind of your schools, your context that you're in right now. Do you believe that 50%, even just like that's a low number, that 50% of your students could give, their social networks to an employer or college and benefit, where most of them be in trouble? And this teacher said, look, we know people are looking at this. Why don't we actually ensure that kids can use this to their advantage? And what's fascinating about Beverly, she applied to USC, which is her dream school. She didn't get in though. Her grades were not good enough. So she contacted USC and she said, Google me. They Googled her, said, we'd love to have you. And now she's graduated from USC. And so what are the opportunities that we talk about, hey, we want to make sure our kids have opportunities so they got to do well in tests. But if you Google them and you find terrible stuff, it's probably not going to, happen for them. And so this is something I've been really focusing on, and kind of things that we'll be creating in this space is that when kids leave high school, do they have these things? And so the first one's a professional social network. And I'm not talking about like Edmodo or Google Classroom or anything like that. I'm talking about, for example, if you want to be a photographer, you need to be on Instagram. If you want to be a chef, YouTube channel will be hugely beneficial. Where are the spaces that you connect with people that do work similar to what you want to actually do? The second one is a digital portfolio. And this has to go beyond school stuff, right? And this shouldn't be just for parent consumption. How do you ensure that every kid that you work with right now, who every single one of them is going to be Google for a job, will benefit? And this is not limited to college or, applying for a job. If your kid shows up to my house to play with my kid, I will be Googling your kid and I will Google you. And if you think I'm crazy for saying that, my mom would old school Google, she'd phone everybody. It's the same process, just a different medium. And then a digital landing page bringing these things together, through this space. And what are the opportunities here? And my brother, Dr. Couros, a professor of educational technology, created this image called the network teacher. And what you'll see on the outside is all these technologies that honestly did not exist or were not mainstream when I first started teaching in 1999. But they're here today. 20 years from now, something's going to replace them and be better. But really, when you look at this, what's never going to go away is those arrows. Every single one of you can make me a better teacher. So where's your stuff? Where's the stuff I can learn from you? Because I got a ton of stuff you can learn from me. And how do we create these spaces, not only in this course, but outside of it, where we actually elevate the profession of education through this consistent sharing? And kind of going through this process, what we did in my school district when I was there, kindergarten, grade 12, every student had access to create one space, no matter what class, teacher, subject, grade, even school. And you can actually see them develop over time. You can actually see the stuff that they're creating through the space, because digital allows you to do this in a way you could have never done with paper. Because this doesn't just show kind of the product of learning, but more importantly, the process. And you can see with this digital photography teacher, this teacher said, look, I want to see your final picture, but you need to explain how you got there. And you can do this for anything you teach, in this course, in the space as well.
My final subject was this wooden bridge. I first took a picture looking straight at the bridge to try and capture the length of the bridge. This picture, however, had too many distractions and didn't capture what I wanted. This is when I found more angles that kept a feeling of depth, but looked more interesting. So I sat down on the bridge and took a shot against the post. This picture looked much better and eliminated a lot of the distractions and added better lighting.
So if you listen to the kid, they say, here's where things went wrong. Here's how I redirected it to make it right. And if you remember, for me, when I was a kid, Pluto was considered a planet. And now, some of that information changes, debates on that whole thing. But understanding that some information changes over time, but the process of learning is forever. And what are we instilling in our kids? And like, why does this even matter? And why does this course matter? Why is it beneficial to the work that we do? And I think one of the videos that I've been really showing over the last few months has been this one by a student named Liv McNeil. And Liv actually shared their experience through the last few months of school. And is school something that kids see as a checklist? If you think about your top academic students, would they accelerate their way out of your school as soon as possible? Or do they see it as something as purposeful and meaningful? And you can see, during, her time in school, you can see how school is just like a checklist of things to get done and how overwhelming it is. But has it been masked, in the past by being able to have social interaction with one another? Playing sports is a huge thing for me. And kids could kind of get through this because, they had all those other things. But then when you actually just look at the process of school, is it something that we just check off? And if you watch this video and not only watch it, but feel it, is this experience we want for any of our kids, including ourselves? And I know personally, this is not something I would want for my own kids, nor do I want it for anyone's kids, nor do I want it for the adults. How do we create something that's really me? I can barely watch that video. It's just kind of gut wrenching. What do we create, with the work that we do in education? And years ago, I created this image talking about school versus learning. And I don't think it's an either or. I don't like dealing in absolutes. But if you really think about asking kids, do you like school and do you like learning? Do they see the question as the same thing? Do they see it something that's totally disconnected? And you can see kids thrive learning in many spaces that they're excited about, that they're passionate about. But do they see school as just a thing that's about, compliance? And again, this is not about absolutes. So for example, if you want to do meaningful creation, you have to have consumption through that process. John Medina, author of Brain Rules, I saw him speak and he said something really powerful to me. He said, creation without consumption is like the equivalent of playing the air guitar. You might know the motions, but you don't actually know how to play. And so really, how do we ensure, and this is what I've been so amazed by with so many educators across the world over the last few months, they really focus on that learning portion of this, really about how do we ensure that kids have social experiences when they're isolated alone, because we know how important that is and how crucial that is in the work that we're doing. How do we help kids make their own connections? We don't have access to them, in the ways that we did, in a face-to-face setting. And so really kind of looking at that learning and creating something really powerful in the work that we're doing. And for me, this is kind of my motto, is the idea of change and opportunity to do something amazing. And the best change that can happen, because no matter what, change is always going to happen. But the best change we can go through is the one we create ourselves. And so this whole course is about not only thinking about those solutions, but creating that mentality, that mindset on how we create solutions for ourselves as we move forward. The people who have thrived during this time are the ones who create those solutions. So that's just kind of like a brief overview, just some thoughts of like kind of what we're doing through this time. Alina, how did I do? Was that, you wanted to do a Zoom practice? I got zoomed down, hey?
You did a great job.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So, hey, so that's just like kind of just some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about, but it's really meant to be personalized, really meant to be personalized through this entire time. So if this time right now, we have probably about, and I don't know how long Alina can stay on. I honestly got nothing to do other than watch basketball after this. So if we would love for you to throw some questions in the chat, or you can, take over the video and ask questions about what I just shared, ask questions about the content, and either Alina or I can answer them. But thanks for being here. We'd love to have you as part of the class, moving forward. So any questions, any thoughts?
I want to make sure I share the dates of your course. I did mention that it's a 6-week course, and it does begin October 13th and extends through November 24th.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, for me as a professional, it's like the due dates. Basically, you got to get everything done before it's over. It's not like if you don't get it in this week, you're going to get kicked out or anything like that. So there's a lot of flexibility in this, and there's a lot of flexibility on what you can do for this, because I'm a big believer in you creating, like I'm looking at the ideas you share, not necessarily the platform you share it on or how you connect. So we're going to be doing things like, hey, we want you to do like a 1-minute video on this topic, which seems like a really easy assignment, but can actually be quite challenging to actually succinctly share ideas in a 1-minute platform, but like giving different opportunities to share ideas. So it's meant to be flexible, because we all know, like none of you are just, none of you, October is like your slow time in education. There is no slow time. So we want to provide flexibility with structure, I guess is the best way to say that. So we'd love for you to pop on and say hi. Like even if you don't have a question, if you just say hi to me, because this is like just me and Alina, and
Yes, we
not that Alina's not wonderful, but I just don't want to be ourselves. And that got someone to leave right away.
Definitely. But yeah, feel free to type your questions in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and show yourself.
Natalie, you must have a question. I don't think we've ever met in person, so I'd love for you to pop out, and I don't know if you're there. Let's see.
Well, okay.
Hey, how's it going? Are you at school, Natalie?
We have to unmute you.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
I don't think, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
There's another person in office, Lindsay, you have to get in here too. So we have to keep our masks on.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, how are you doing?
Good, thanks for being here today.
Yeah,
you must have some question.
Oh, I mean, I have like a million questions.
Well, just give us one. Just get the ball rolling.
Ooh, should we ask? We've been talking a lot about innovation, Lindsay and I. We're both in roles where we can impact innovation in our organization. And we are reflecting a lot on how you create an innovative culture with the traditional hierarchies that tend to come along with a lot of school organizations. Even when we talk about being more flat, we'll say the words, there's a lot of traditional hierarchies that create like a deference complex that everyone has around everyone else. So it's how do we deal with that?
Well, that's actually what the whole course is about. That's like and I think that's why it's really important, because your context, I don't know if you're like in an administrative role or kind of like a in-between role, classroom role. It's like, how do you create that culture of innovation? I think a lot of times when we talk about culture of innovation, we actually we think about like, how do we get, push our ideas onto other people? And I think for me, it's really kind of finding like, what are these people really good at? How do we bring that out to them? How do we actually go closer to them and pull them with us, as opposed to kind of pushing people off a ledge? Because I think a lot of people you know, have a lot of good experiences. And I think really kind of broadening the idea of what innovation really means, because a lot of people, when they hear the term innovation, they think good with technology. That's what innovation is to them. And so really kind of identifying what are those things that we're doing that are innovative in our practice right now, and starting from there and moving backwards, as opposed to like saying, well, you know, these people are never going to be innovative because they're like kind of old school thinkers, right?
Yeah.
And really kind of like, it's really kind of focusing on that pull. If you read some of my articles when on my blog, like 2011, 2012, like I hate them. And the reason I hate them is because it's like, if you don't like move quicker, you're irrelevant and blah, blah, blah. And what that did is it got applause from the people who already agreed with me, but it pushed away the people who I needed to bring forward, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's really kind of trying to go to people and pull them with you, as opposed to like kind of pushing them, you know, forward or out. Because I think that's a lot of times the process. And I know that's kind of like an abstract general idea, but I think that's really when we're talking about it. I think a lot of times when we talk about innovation, we ostracize people as opposed to bringing people together. That makes sense. Yeah.
Totally. Another thing that we're curious about, we had a conversation this morning about it, was, I mean, innovation and creativity are usually always packaged together.
Right.
Innovation almost has more of the business, like commerce connotation to it, whereas creativity has much more of that human connotation to it. It's something we do. You've kind of chosen to stick with innovation as your word. Why did you go that route?
So creativity. So when I talk about it in the book, creativity is more about like ideas. Innovation is more about implementation and action. So there's a lot of people that have really creative ideas who don't actually put it into action. I think innovation is about leading to action. And the thing that separates, and I honestly don't know if you've ever read my books or any of the stuff I've done. So like the thing that is consistent with me is I talk about innovation as a very human endeavor. And I think a lot of times when we hear the term innovation, like people are expecting like the coolest things, like the latest and greatest tech. And I think that to me is why innovation is so crucial, is because the way I look at the terminology and the definition of it, and really thinking about how do we get that really human relationship centered idea, right? So I'll give you an example, right? I'm your administrator, you hate me, and I don't look at any of your strengths. You're not going to be innovative. But if I know stuff about you, if I build those connections, you are going to go a lot further and be more innovative. But people miss that out. I remember getting in an argument with someone about like, you don't have to build relationships to be innovative. In what role have you ever done where you hated your boss? Did you ever feel you were excelling, right? And doing things like totally, mind-blowing. And I know that the places where I flourished were the ones where I had connection, where I knew someone would push me, but they had my back. And I think that's why I talk about it. So when we talk about creativity, I think it's more the idea, and innovation is creativity in action. That's the way I look at it. And I know, like, I don't know if I'm giving you the definition from what Merriam-Webster, but that's, I think to me, when I think of the term innovation, I think, something that leads to action. Whereas I know a lot of creative people who don't necessarily, put things in action. I think that's how I kind of distinguish the two.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, I'm looking forward to our podcast.
Me too. Can't wait.
There was a question about registration and cost. I placed a link in the chat that takes you directly to our the University of San Diego's Continuing Ed office, which has information on this course. And as I said before, I'll follow up via email with everyone who signed up for the webinar as well. Yeah, and as a bonus, I'm gonna actually add. I have a digital portfolio course. That's typically $100, but if you sign up, you're just going to have that as part of the course, so you can have like kind of a step-by-step, and you can actually get a free blog through that too. So that will be part of the course as well. So. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. But I don't know, unless someone else has a question. I know we kind of aim for 45 minutes, but if anyone, do we have someone popping up for a question? Dr. Julie Kramer?
And Harry. Yeah.
Hey, how are you?
Hi.
Hey,
From San Diego. Yeah, so great. So I'm not sure about that. This is an odd question. I thought I would ask it rather than put it in text because, because you don't get really the context. I've been thinking a lot about and looking into culturally responsive practices.
Yep.
I was doing some research on, because a case study in Hawaii on place-based education. And it was this really struck me was, they have such a deep belief in the wisdom of the land and those who came before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's what you touched on a little bit about, not wanting to leave someone behind, but then their understanding that the wisdom of the elders, the wisdom of the land, has something. So not innovating for innovation's sake.
Mm-hmm.
Is it something around? I'm trying to make this connection between this concept of innovator's mindset and sort of that reflective or critical understanding of kind of what it means to engage students, or also coming to you with maybe a different cultural mindset,
right?
Concept of innovation. And I guess that's that confusing piece about, is innovation technology? Is that innovation creativity?
Right. Yeah. So for me, when you talk about this, I think that's why, kind of just in the conversation with Natalie, this is why it's such a relational thing. So the notion of innovation is simply doing new and better things, right? So I'll give you an example. Storytelling has a lot of cultural significance, right? And I think that if you look at that, Alina and I had a conversation. It's like, hey, do you want to practice Zoom? I'm like, if I do not have Zoom now, I'm in trouble. And so looking at the way that I share stories, I share a ton of stories, but the way that I share them, using video to kind of make my point, things like that. There's an evolution of how can we tell stories, if, for example, in the 21st century, where we understand the cultural significance of how important story is, but also do it in a way that, can resonate. And you can see, for example, I know this is kind of a weird thing, but TikTok, people tell really amazing stories in 10 to 60 second constraints. So it's looking at, some traditional things that we've done in the past and building on, and really looking at the strengths that we have in our organization as well, and moving backwards. And I think that's why, to me, it's such a relational piece when we talk about innovation. So the premise of the course, I'm actually teaching another course with a group as well. And one of the couple of questions I ask are what is something you're passionate about? And what is something you're really strong at? And based on those questions, what I do with that is I kind of develop things for specific people based on those answers, as opposed to you got to figure this out. And I think people need to kind of identify, some of the strengths, because a lot of times in school, if we're being honest, we want everyone to fit in the same box, right? So when you hear the term equity, a lot of people are like, hey, we need to make sure every kid has this technology. I'm like, no, you don't. You need to make sure every kid has what they need to be successful, because those aren't always the same thing. So for example, Lena might thrive using a laptop, whereas you might thrive using pen and paper, or vice versa. So some kids, this was actually really apparent. Some kids in the last few months, they totally thrived in a remote learning environment, and they've actually never done well in a face-to-face setting. So the question is why? What made them do well? And what happens when they go back? And really kind of that, to me, is part of that innovation, is looking at it from a very personal standpoint. How do we ensure that every kid is successful in a way that is meaningful to them? Not every kid is successful in a way that we define for them, because that's what schools do all the time. But that being said, as an administrator who has to get test scores to get funding and blah, 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 how do I actually do those things while making sure I check off those boxes? Because a lot of people were doing really innovative things in the last few months because standardized tests were gone, right? But they're coming back. And I don't think it's an either or. I think it's, how do you do both? How do you ensure that they get the traditional metrics down, but all, as you kind of said, really, have a cultural relevancy to, their work, and find success in a way that's meaningful to them. For me, I don't believe every kid needs to go to college. I want every kid to find a way to success that's meaningful to them. If a kid finds a path where they want to be a YouTuber and they do that. We had students in our schools who did their portfolio for a cosmetology class. They never went to university, never applied for the job. They have makeup and hair tutorial YouTubes, and they make a lot of money doing something they love. That to me is success, right? Whereas some people say, well, those kids never went to college. I'm like, and like that doesn't designate success for them. They're happy doing something where they're making a living. That to me is something I would, I'm glad I have the opportunity. So I think it really, talking about innovation and really seeing it like, how do I bring out the best from your experience? How do I bring out the best in you based on what your strengths are, what your abilities are, and how do we actually emulate that for all of our students as well? Because I think there's obviously culture is one of them, but they're like, talk about passions, talk about strengths. Those things all matter to me, right? So I don't know if that makes sense, or I'm just kind of rambling now.
No, it does.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah. And I think that's a big separator, is because people think innovation is like, oh, I'm just going to do a bunch of tech stuff.
Right.
And that's not the point, right?
Right. And I think, so what resonated with me was that idea of sort of innovation as story. What is the story,
Mm-hmm.
how you approach innovation, or, from your context?
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily have to be exactly the way someone else might approach innovation, so like a rural, so I think about, like, from, say, how do we approach this idea of an innovator's mindset from a rural context? So that's like, I don't know, but that would be like a curious thought to me. Is it different than an urban context? Why? Yes, no, maybe a little, don't know, but want to ask the question.
Yeah, and I think even within the context of like an urban context and a rural, there could be different innovations for different kids in different spaces too, right? And I think that actually really matters in the work that we're doing. So I'll give you an example. There are things that you do, I guarantee, that I would deem as innovation. I have never seen them before. There's something you excel at, and they're totally new to me, and that would be a better way for me to do it. But for you, those would be best practice. That's just what Julie does. That's just what I do, right? And I think that, to me, is understanding that it's also subjective on where you are as, an individual, where you are as an organization, that some of the things that you do that you would deem as innovative might be best practice, and vice versa. And understanding that we talk about best practice all the time, but there's not a single best practice ever identified in education that works perfectly for every single kid in our schools. So every best practice has to be modified, remixed for the context. But there's also never thing we've called best practice that wasn't once an innovation, that somebody came along and said, hey, you know what? The stuff we're doing is not working. We need to try something new. So I think it's really kind of identifying the context of where you're at, and then identifying the strategies, what work for the people that I'm with, as opposed to simply saying, hey, like this was the hard thing about writing Innovator's Mindset. I'm telling people, hey, this is a book about innovation, but I'm not going to tell you how to do it, because if I told you exactly how to be innovative, it's not really innovative. You have to figure that out for yourself. If that makes sense, right? Like, hey, you're going to be innovative. Do these 10 things. No, that's not innovative. That's you following a recipe, right? So I think for me, as you said, Julie, and I saw Lena share a comment too, it's really that looking at it from a personal context of how we create new and better opportunities in the context of every situation that we're in, whether it's like individual or organizational. Alina, you got some thoughts too. I see you.
Those are excellent points.
Yeah.
I think that, it's a very learner-centered approach. You have individual learners with individual needs, and, there isn't, like you said, a recipe that fits every single child.
Yeah.
I think that getting to know, understanding the students that you work with, humanizing them, making those connections, as an educator, will help you to know what is, what works best for your students. And so I appreciate that approach to it, because it isn't just one formula fits every single classroom across America, because it just doesn't. But understanding innovation in terms of your specific individual setting, is helpful. And I think that your course will be really beneficial for educators with helping to identify those factors, the things to look for within your organization to find out what's best for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think, Alina, a lot of people have had to go do other things and probably got all the questions. So I know I'm going to say goodbye, but thanks, Julie. Thanks for popping on. But if you have any questions too, I know that you can reach out to me, and I don't know if you can reach out to Alina as well. But if you have questions about the course or anything I can help you with, I'd look forward to hearing from you. So thanks for spending your time with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, George. Take care.
Okay. All right. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.